Welcome, Pewter Report readers and listeners, to another edition of the Pewter Report podcast, energized by Celsius. I am John Ledyard from pewterreport.com. Also with me today, the one and only texting. Oh, wow. Like very, very young, very hip teen thing for you to do, Mark Cook, a young man like yourself, texting during the intro to the show. Glad to have you aboard with us.
I'm channeling my inner Taylor or Trevor. Sorry.
Trevor, I was going to say that's definitely
Trevor was king.
Oh my
gosh. He could not have done the video podcast. That we couldn't have had a video podcast when we first started because he literally was on his phone the entire time.
You could hear it. I remember doing Locked On NFL Draft with him, and you could hear him like texting while I was like, "Hey, do you hear my question?" Like it was, but
and amazingly, he could kind of keep up with the flow of things.
Oh my gosh,
he could multitask. I do give him credit for that for sure.
Oh, absolutely, no question about it. And joining the show for the first time ever is JC Allen, the newest Bucs beat reporter and staff writer over at pewterreport.com. JC, your first article went up today on pewterreport.com. We are excited to have you aboard, man. Excited for you to be on this show with us.
I'm excited to be here. I can't wait to just get to work and dive in and give the listeners and the viewers great content and just add to an already stellar staff that's in place. So I'm happy to be here. Can't wait.
Wow, very, very dignified start, don't you think, Mark? I mean, give those marks. He already said a good staff in place. So, I mean, obviously feeding our egos right away. We'll take that.
Yeah, he's no dummy. I'll give him that for sure. He needs to work on his background a little bit. I mean, I thought mine was really bad with Barrett.
That's a little plain.
We'll
work on it. Banner behind me, but it's
and we need to definitely get you a Pewter Report shirt too. The plain Haynes BFT.
Oh, those are on their way.
Yeah, we're gonna get that.
The Pewter Report shirts are on their way, but I mean, I wear the plain shirts all the time too. I can't walk the Buccaneer Bruce like you do every day. You've got the look down. Yeah, I don't come styled for the podcast. I just got some t-shirt on now.
I got the look down and all the health problems Bruce has. So I might as well be a 68-year-old man right now.
That sounds good to me. Hey, this show, like all the others on the Pewter Report podcast, is brought to you by our good friends over at Celsius. Celsius powers active lives every day with essential functional energy. The new Tropical Vibes Sparkling Starfruit Pineapple Edition is wonderful. You need to check it out. But hey, I would be remiss if I didn't tell you, I dropped one of them, about the newest and best thing that Celsius has going on is this deal with the fast protein bars they got going on. The white chocolate cookies and cream is a game changer flavor, but I think my favorite is the salted caramel peanut crunch. You get 20 grams of protein and only 2 grams of sugar in these bars. It's great. It's hard to forget protein without getting sugar too. This is a great source and a great opportunity for you to be able to do that with these bars. They are terrific stuff. And the taste. It's always about the taste with Celsius. You know you're getting a good taste with these bars. So definitely make sure you check those out. There's a link in the description of this show. You can go to that link and click on that link, and it gives you an opportunity to get a variety pack with both of these flavors in it. It's terrific stuff. I just had one before we went on the show. Sometimes I forget to eat because I'm working so hard. And so, you know me, guys, I mean, it's just I'm so hard at work, and, it's just tough. Yeah. It's a tough life we lead.
Yeah, those ditches you dig out back, and the roofing that you do, and people that are actually working for a living are like, shut up, John, just stop it.
Stop. You're covering a sport, dude. Get lost.
110 today.
But hey, listen, Celsius.com, the banner ads over at pewterreport.com. You can click on those and get yourself some Celsius. Find your way to those fast protein bars because they are game changers for y'all. All right, we got today's show topic, fellas, is the most disappointing Bucs of all time. And yes, Josh, JC, I should say, you were getting thrown into the fire here, having to go back in Bucs history before you're able to go forward with us on a podcast. It'd be easy for you to talk about the upcoming season. You've been doing that for a while. We're going to test your resolve here and take you back in Bucs history. Some not very far back, but still decently far back because Jason Light's been killing it recently. Hard to find many recent disappointments, but we might have a few on our list too that are under the Light regime. I know I have a couple as well, but Mark, you have been at this thing the longest, and you do know the history of this team probably better than anyone under the sun. So why don't you give us, so we're doing 1 through 5, I guess. I just kind of have a group of people I want to talk about more than a ranking.
I'm ranking mine, man. You guys do whatever you want to. I'm going to start with my number 5.
All right, start with your number 5.
I actually gave it away on the podcast. Now, this is the only modern era I'm going to call him Buccaneer. So, as I'm dressed like an old man, and I am an old man, and I'm wearing the old uniform colors, I'm going to pretty much go with older guys. But this is one of the newer regime guys, and I gave it away during yesterday in the podcast, or actually when Scott and I were on, when I did the FSU chop. And no, It's not Jameis Winston. It's another Florida State guy, Roberto Aguayo. Just an absolute disaster of a pick. And I like Jason Light. I appreciate his aggressiveness, his, like Bruce says, no risk it, no biscuit. That was a risk that he took. Anytime you take a kicker in the draft at all, much less trade up in the second round for one, you're asking to be scorned, yelled at, screamed, cursed. It might turn out to be good, but most of the time it doesn't. So Roberto Aguayo is number 5 on my list. Sorry, Jason. Don't mean to beat you up. This is the only one of your picks on my list officially of the top 5, but Roberto Aguayo, again, as great as he was in college, could not transition to the NFL, did not have the mental makeup at all to be able to be successful in the National Football League, and just a disaster of a pick for the Buccaneers.
And now, JC, you hail from that New England area, and you know some of the background that maybe prompted Jason Light to take a kicker, to trade up for a kicker. And one of his few draft mistakes, he heard it from Bill Belichick. He knew that the Patriots valued the kicker position. If you could get a stud there, that's a player that's going to lead your team in points and all this stuff. You got to draft one. So a little bit of what that background was like for him.
Yeah, I mean, if you can get we've seen them, draft kickers, and the last 2 years they've struggled, but Adam Vinatieri and Steve Gostkowski were just pillars and cornerstones for that franchise. So if you can get a guy, and you think he's going to be the best, obviously Aguayo, the most accurate kicker in college history, and then, you draft him that high and you just flops on you. He was actually just with the Patriots. They just released him, so
that's right.
They took a look at him too to see what he had in the tank. But I'm with Mark. He's on my list here too. You just can't draft a kicker that high. I get it. You want to lock it down, especially with the Buccaneers kicking woes that they've had for so long. You want to try to fulfill that spot. Might as well take the best one. Make sure you get him early, so no one else can snatch him up. But talk about a disappointment. Just came in and was just an absolute flop from the get-go.
But that's just it, JC. Nobody was going to snap him up. He would have still been there in the 4th or 5th round. I don't buy that, he would have gotten drafted. And you know what? If he does, that's okay. You go find somebody else, because kickers are so – to find a good one is not exactly easy, but there's a ton of question mark kickers out there. And Buccaneers were facing this going into last year with Matt Gay on the roster. They bring in Ryan Suckup late, and he ends up winning that kicking battle. Now, Matt's doing fine in L.A. The Rams are happy with him, but there are plenty of those guys out there you can find to be mediocre if you're going to draft a kicker in the second round. That was just a ridiculous thing.
I looked almost exclusively for this exercise. I looked almost exclusively at big money free agents and first round picks, just because I think one of the big things in determining this list is the degree of expectation for the player in those situations. But Aguayo for a non-first, to trade up for a kicker, you basically have to be a Hall of Fame caliber kicker. There's no real in between to be worth it. And even then, you would probably, analytics would probably make an argument against it, but yeah, that's basic. So, you talk about pressure right off the bat, and obviously he completely folded in the face of pressure, and that's kind of been the story of his career so far. So good choice, I think, Mark, by you to have him in there, even though he obviously wasn't a first-round pick, wasn't necessarily a big money free agent signing, but he's got to be in there, right? That was just an absolute crash and burn, and a pick that was under a lot of scrutiny, especially because of the trade up in that situation. So, all right, JC, what do you got? Who's number 5 on your list?
I had Aguayo in there as well, but just for the sake of keeping it, going with some different guys, I've got more than 5. I'm going to go here with let's go with MJ Stewart. Not just because of the disappointment of his career, but also the players taken behind him that have excelled, in this system, in this scheme. A second round pick, not necessarily as highly touted as a first round pick, but you draft a guy, you develop a guy, you invest in a guy, and that's what Jason Light has done here, investing in that backfield, in that defensive backfield, that secondary, and for him to just kind of fizzle out and not do anything and get outshadowed and overplayed by guys taken later than him, I think you got to throw him on the list of one of the most disappointing Bucs in recent history.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, not a first round pick. So again, like maybe there's the expectation argument could be made against him. But I mean, Mark, you saw this firsthand. How bad was MJ Stewart? I mean, he was horrible as a Buck. There was not, was there even a redemptive game? I know only because I think I watched most of his snaps with the Bucs. I mean, how much better they got when they just cut him loose and he was no longer on the team. It was remarkable to see that with he and Vernon Hargraves.
Yeah, both of those guys are really bad, and Vernon didn't make my top 5, but I came up with a next 5, and Vernon was definitely on that list as well. Vernon had a few shining moments at least, but as you said, John, there was not a whole lot of redeeming qualities to MJ Stewart. Now he seems to have found a home in Cleveland, but the couple games that I watched of Cleveland last year, whenever a player was getting burned in the secondary, usually was number 36. I think that was his number with Cleveland last year. And it wasn't surprising that it was MJ Stewart. Now, again, Cleveland seems to be a lot happier with him. But Scott Reynolds early on, and I mean early on, guys, said, and this is the thing about Scott. Scott's not afraid to challenge Jason Light or Bruce Allen or Rich McKay. He's fearless. And I know I remember him specifically telling Jason Light he doesn't have the speed to cover man-to-man. He just doesn't. He can't keep up with guys in if he gets in a trail position, he's beat. And Jason's like, he's trying to defend it in his mind. But Scott's it proved to be true, at least in the scheme that the Buccaneers were running when MJ Stewart was drafted. He was not a good fit at all. And clearly wasn't a good fit, or Todd Bowles would have figured out a way to keep him as well. So
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that's not a terrible pick at all. The only thing that I would say that maybe one reason it wasn't necessarily in my list is to me there's guys that were worse. Is they really knew they needed secondary help and they just threw a lot of things up against the wall. And if 50% of those guys ended up sticking, which, you go MJ Stewart, then you go Carlton Davis. One of those two guys turned out to be a really damn good football player. That's kind of what you have to do in the draft, particularly when you get out of the first round. But I'm not arguing with that. He was a bad pick, very disappointing for the Buccaneers when you look at where he was drafted.
Right, for sure. And for me, again, these list isn't necessarily in any order because the order probably better than anybody, Mark. I just picked a bunch of guys that are disappointing, and I'm going to try to bring up guys that maybe you guys don't necessarily mention or I don't think you will mention. I got to throw Josh Freeman out there, though. I mean, and I know things got off to a good start with Josh Freeman, too. It didn't look like it was going to be that bad. But to me, that's part of what makes it so disappointing. Like, he's a quarterback in the first round and he starts off well. The expectation level should be that this guy is going to turn around your franchise. He's going to lead you back to the playoffs. He's going to be the next savior of the Bucs. And instead, not only was he underwhelming after that, but he didn't put his full heart and soul into everything that he was doing in Tampa Bay either. And so that makes it even more disappointing because the ability was there. Jameis, for all the issues that he had, he busted his tail to try to be the best version of himself that he could be. I don't think that happened with Josh Freeman. So to me, he's an easy inclusion in the most disappointing list, given that level of expectation and talent that he brought to the table.
And, you could even go Jameis. He's not on my list. I don't know if he's on either of you guys' list. He's not on my list. But when you're the number 1 overall draft pick and you don't make it to your second contract, that's got to be disappointing. Now, again, if you're Jason Light, what was his choice, right? They needed a quarterback. They knew they desperately needed a quarterback, and it was him or Marcus Mariota. Neither one of those guys have lit it up. Mariota's a backup in Las Vegas right now. Who knows if he ever sees the field again as a starter? He was not very good at Tennessee. They went and traded for Ryan Tannehill that's how bad Mariota was essentially. So, but Jameis wasn't very good as well. But I don't disagree with Josh at all because, again, a guy that we saw talent, we saw glimpses of what he could be, and just to watch him fall off the cliff, people can blame Greg Schiano all you want. Was Greg the right coach for Josh? Probably not. Josh
but then
Freeman,
neither was anybody else because he was out of the league.
A lot. He was just so many self-inflicted wounds from Josh Freeman. It wasn't just Greg Schiano. I promise you, we know so many more things that we just can't talk about specifically. It wasn't just Greg Schiano. They weren't a good match. They weren't a good fit. That's true.
He's opened up about it a little bit. JC was Winston. I want to stay on Winston for a minute here just because this is divisive, right? I didn't know whether I was going to bring him up at the end of the show. I didn't think Mark would have him at all or mention him, and I didn't think you would have him, and I was going to bring him up at the end of the show. He didn't make my top 5, but I'm curious if he made yours and what your thoughts are on him.
It was a back and forth, right? Because Winston, you look at he's got all the physical talent, right? He's got all the tools. Really, it's for him. It's always been decision making: when to throw an interception, when to take a sack, when to throw it away. Struggled with accuracy issues and stuff like that as well. But as Mark said, if you're the number 1 overall pick, and Jason Light's hand where it's tied, it's really tough to not make it to that second contract. And not only that, not to even get a redeeming contract. You had to settle for a veterans minimum on a team.
No interest around the league, basically.
It's tough to put him as one of the most disappointing, because he did have some decent times here and decent games here, and there was glimmers more so than Josh had of hope. And I think that's why you still have a lot of these Jameis stands out there who, Jameis 101 and, all his little following and stuff like that will come at you and be like, Jameis is this, he's the most that, Buccaneers history. And it's difficult because of his potential and what he could have done if he could have just, got head on.
I think Ben Leeper says it well here. It's not a question of whether he's a bust or not. That's almost a different discussion with Jameis in some ways. I mean, I think there could be correlation here, but the question is more specific even than that. Was he disappointing for what he was drafted to be? I think no question when you're the number 1 overall pick and if you don't get your team, that team doesn't even get to the playoffs. And I'm not saying that's all on Jameis, but certainly he's a huge reason why it didn't happen. I mean, the turnovers and the sacks that he took consistently, the accuracy issues that plagued him. You look at the receivers and the talent that they had and look at their numbers when things changed this year at the quarterback position. Every receiver on the team had their best catch rate of their careers with a different quarterback. And it was Cutter and Bruce Arians, they have a lot of similarities in their offense. They're both downfield, very vertical, aggressive passing attacks. It's not like all of a sudden everything changed other than the quarterback. I mean, like there was a lot of it was carryover, and the quarterback changed, and all of a sudden a Super Bowl was won. And I'm not saying it's all Brady being better than Winston, but but yes, he should be on a list. Maybe top 5, no, but I think he's got to be on a list. But you're right. At the same time, I absolve Jason Light completely. He had to take Winston was the best quarterback in that class. He was the best chance. Most guys grow at the next level. Winston just didn't. He just didn't. They never cut out the things that really killed his game in college that you thought, he'll get good enough. That no, it never really happened. So he's a fascinating conversation because he obviously leads the franchise in quarterback stats. But
John, who's not disappointing, John?
Oh,
Briar Reeves Insurance Agency.
That's what I was going to guess.
Briar Reeves has been around 31 years. There's no Buccaneer players that have been around 31 years. There's nobody in that organization, I don't think, anymore that's been around 31 years. But Briar Reeves has been in the Tampa Bay area serving their customers in the Tampa Bay community for 31 years. The same amount of years that you and Ryan Griffin have been alive, John. That's a long time. You guys are getting pretty old up there. So Briar Reeves, listen, if you want to trust somebody, trust Briar Reeves. And I say that because I personally trust them with my homeowner's insurance. Scott Reynolds does the thing. We're going to get JC on the train. We're going to get your wife on the train because I'm sure she handles all of those things. Next time your homeowner's insurance comes up, give Briar Reeves a call. Let them compare and see. John, they might be able to save you some money. They might not. That's the great thing about them. They're not going to BS you and say, oh, yeah, and they're going to lower your limits to save you a little bit of money. They may suggest you do that. You may be carrying too high of limits. That's the great thing about them. They're just going to give you an honest assessment. You're going to have an opportunity to save some money, put some money in your pocket with a trusted source, and an extra benefit. Briar and Sam are huge Buccaneer fans. So at the very least, the worst possible case is they can't save you any money, but you get to spend 10 or 15 minutes talking Buccaneers football with them. Give them a call, 813-876-4166, 876-4166, BriarGreavesInsurance.com.
Great stuff from Sam and Briar, as always. All right, number 4 on your list. Mark, who do you have?
You guys have no idea who this is, and probably most people in the chat don't either.
What? Really?
1991, the Buccaneers had the number 7 overall pick in the draft. They selected an offensive tackle from the University of Tennessee by the name of Charles McRae, one of the absolute worst. You're talking about a top 10 draft pick. It's hard to screw up top 10 offensive linemen, John. Normally, you pick in the top 10, you figure this guy's going to be a plug-and-play 10-year starter. It's usually these guys are pretty consensus around the league. The problem with Charles McRae was he did not love football at all. In fact, in a story with the Sarasota Herald Tribune back in 2003, they caught up with Charles McRae, and he admitted football is not the most and never has been the most important thing in his life. And to me, that's a huge red flag when you're scouting a football player. You've got to have guys in the building that love the game of football. Now, Charles was also drafted to bookend Paul Gruber. Charles played left tackle in college. They moved him to right tackle. It never was a fit. Charles hated the organization, guys. Charles came in, took one look at the weight room at One Buccaneer Place, the old One Buccaneer Place, and was quoted as saying, "My high school had a better weight room than the Buccaneers." And he's not exaggerating. No. Scott can tell you from the old building, they literally had the weight room out on a patio with an awning over it. It was outside, exposed to the weather. I mean, there wasn't even any air conditioning in their weight room. A lot of the guys actually went to like the local Bally's and whatever the fitness places were around to work out because it was just an embarrassment. But Charles McRae in itself was a complete disappointment. Again, how you can be this talented. And from a physical standpoint, he was a big man. He was a strong man. He had agility, all of these things. He just didn't love the game of football. And the Buccaneers used a number 7 overall pick. You know who else was drafted in the 1997 draft, guys, that the Buccaneers could have taken? Maybe you've heard of him. Brett Favre, second rounder. No. I mean, there's so many guys when you look down the list. It just makes you cringe when you think about the different guys the Buccaneers could have drafted. Instead of Brett Favre, they drafted Charles McRae, number 7 overall. So I think there's maybe some old timers in the chat that'll agree with me. That was just a dreadful, dreadful disappointment in a pick. And John, you were saying you're kind of going with free agent guys. To me, I'm going with draft because the draft, free agent guys supplement your draft. The draft is the foundation. And when you continuously blow top 10 draft picks like this Buccaneer football team has done over its 46-year history, that's why one reason why up until this year, they were really them and the Cleveland Browns had the lowest winning percentage in the NFL, really in all of professional sports, if I'm not mistaken, over the last 20 or 30 years because of poor drafts. And Charles McRae, to me, was another example of that. And that's why he's number 4 on my list.
Oh, great choice. No question about it. I think you're right about the draft, though. You're onto something. I mean, yeah, I think there's a guy, a free agent that I'll bring up here in a little bit that definitely made my list just because what was going on, I do not know. And this one was kind of on Jason Light, too. But man, most of these guys, when you look, it's a lot of draft picks. I mean, a lot of them before Jason Light was on board. So, JC, who's number 4 on your list?
Number 4 on my list. I'm going to bring it back to the early 2000s, and we're going to go with Kenyatta Walker here. Kenyatta Walker.
Yeah, must
overall, but not just 14th overall. Traded a 2nd round pick up to get the guy. Tried to play him at left tackle, couldn't hack it there. Meant to right tackle. He started about 70 something games for the club, but was just never really a guy. He was a jag there. He was just a guy that could hold up some blockers. He was never outstanding. He was heralded as one of the best, offensive linemen in the draft. Started following the Bucs, saw it, targeted him, gave up significant draft capital to get him, and it just never worked out. He was cut after 6 seasons and, went on to play, I think, 2 more years in the league before he was totally out of it. So,
well, the biggest problem with him, JC, is he was a Gator. I mean, let's just face it. He's a Gator.
He started the list with a Seminole, and then we spent 10 minutes talking about another Seminole.
Yeah, okay, good point. Yeah, no.
We've got another Gator coming up here, though, actually, so maybe we see a trend.
Yeah, there's a trend there. And I don't disagree with that necessarily at all, JC. I mean, Kenyatta was a disappointment. Again, when you look at the perspective of where he was drafted and what you gave up to take this guy and the success that he had or the lack of success that he had. Now, he did end up starting that 2002 Super Bowl season, but I don't remember anything spectacular about this guy at all. I think everybody that remembers Kenyatta Walker playing remembers he was a penalty machine. He makes everybody gets on Donovan Smith because he has those 2 or 3 plays per game where he gets a hold, a false start, and a penalty called on him or whatever. Kenyatta Walker makes Donald Penn look like, not Donald Penn, makes Donovan Smith look like a future Hall of Famer. That's how bad he was. You talk about bad. He didn't just have a bad 3 or 4 plays. He would have entire bad quarters or bad halves. He was that bad.
Sheesh. Wow. I remember his name. I remember him being a bust. I know he won a Super Bowl there with them, obviously, but it was more like surviving him than it was thriving due to his play for sure. So, definite inclusion. He was on my list as well. I'll go another direction just to keep shaking things up. Mark Barron, man, I thought that was just such a bad pick. Like, first of all, the guy didn't work out at safety at all in the NFL. Then he switched to linebacker, has somehow survived. I don't think he's on a team right now. I don't think he got cut from the Broncos maybe last year. But I mean, I remember I watched him in Pittsburgh after his linebacker conversion he was a couple years into it, and he was just terrible. And I was just like, man, he just isn't good anywhere on the field. Like he doesn't have it. And that was a high pick, wasn't it, Mark? That was like a top 10 pick, I believe, seventh overall. And then there were some guys after him that were studs.
Yeah, just a guy named Luke Kuechly.
Right. Yeah, they got Levante David later in that draft. They could have had Levante David and Luke Kuechly in the same draft. You talk about a Sap Brooks, 2 Hall of Famers in the first round. I mean, this could have been another draft where they ended up with 2 Hall of Famers. Mark Dominic probably would still be here if he would have drafted Luke Kuechly. Well, maybe not, but he would have certainly had more feathers in his cap than he does right now.
That's one of the greatest linebacker drafts of all time, man. What an unreal linebacker draft that was. Just studs everywhere. But yeah, definitely. I don't think Mark Barron at linebacker or at safety was one of those guys. So big disappointment in my mind.
The chat's reminding about the Julius Pepper versus Kenyatta Walker loss.
Oh God. Yeah, that was good. You know, you go back to Mark Barron. From I covered him from his, when he was drafted through his whole Buccaneer career. Probably not a more unpleasant guy to interview. And again, I don't know he was a bad guy per se, but he just brought nothing to the table when you interviewed this guy. And every time you asked if you could speak to him in open locker room, he glared at you like you asked if you could sleep with his sister. Right? I mean, he was not. He was like, really? You really asking me to talk right now? And I don't know why we ever did, because nothing ever good came from this guy at all. He was a canned response kind of guy, and just not a lot of creativity there. He worked hard. I don't give him, he was a very athletic looking guy, but he was just not a good fit in Shano's defense. And like you said, he had some success with the Rams later on when they moved him, but just not a great football player. He started off great. He had an interception his very first game against Carolina. I can't remember who was Cam Newton was the quarterback in that game. It was at Raymond James Stadium, and the Bucs won I think 16-10 in that game, but it was pretty much downhill from that game.
Interesting. All right, so back to you, Mark, then, I think for number 3 on your list.
This one may be a consensus, guys, but we're going to go back to the mid-90s and a man that played next to Michael Irvin in Dallas. And I don't want one person in this chat to lie and say they weren't excited when the Buccaneers signed Alvin Harper as the free agent, because there was no talent on this roster really at wide receiver at that point. I think Courtney Hawkins was on the team, and great kid, great guy, but he wasn't a superstar. We all thought that all of a sudden Alvin Harper was going to come to Tampa and continue the success that he had in Dallas. Problem was there wasn't a Michael Irvin lining up next to him in Tampa Bay. And
that was just one of the problems.
It started bad and got worse. He was injured in his very first game. I remember I was on vacation down at the beach. The Buccaneer preseason games weren't sold out back then, so it wasn't on TV. So I was at the pier fishing at the Anna Maria City Pier, had a little transistor radio. And I remember when he got injured against the Jets in that first preseason game. And they thought it was a lot worse than it was. Turned out to be an MCL, not an ACL. But his career was almost dead before he got started here in Tampa Bay with that injury. Missed the first 3 games of that season. Ended up in 2 years with less than 1,000 yards receiving, only 3 touchdowns. One 100-yard game, if I'm not mistaken. In his final year in 96, he had 77 yards on 2 catches against the Broncos, and that was pretty much the highlights from this guy. He had more highlights for driving on a suspended license for not paying tickets than he did highlights on the football field. Just a bad dude, a real jerk. I had a run-in with him in the locker room. I've already told that story on the pod. I won't bore people again with it, but there's not many people that I dislike that played for the Buccaneers more than Alvin Harper. Just a total jerk.
And if people want to hear that story and more about Alvin Harper, they can go back to our last Throwback Thursday podcast where Mark and I ranked our top 10 Bucs of all time. And I scared his heart right out of his chest when I kicked off my list of the best Bucs of all time with Alvin Harper at number 10.
Almost died because I was in mid-swallow of water. And you know that feeling when it's going down the wrong pipe? I saved it. I didn't quite die, but I thought I was going to drown on my own.
I've gotten a great history lesson on Alvin Harper since then. Obviously, that was in jest, but still, I've learned a lot more about the Alvin Harper bust for sure. And you can see one look at the chat, and it reminds what Bucs fans think of Alvin Harper is pretty unanimous. So, that one was always going to be in there. He was on my list too. All right, JC, who do you have at number 3?
All right, I'm going to go, like I said yesterday, I'm going to keep it more modern because I don't know the history of the Buccaneers team as much as obviously Mark does, and I'm excited to learn more about it. But I'm going to go with a guy who came out the gate, drafted early, although you never should draft this position pretty early, but came out the gate, had phenomenal success, and then injuries kind of slowed him down, derailed his career to the point where he's just a legend, of what could have been. And we're going to go with the Cadillac Williams right here.
Oh, that's interesting.
Love Cadillac Williams coming out. I thought the guy was going to be a stud. Him and Ronnie Brown took the league by storm, rushed for 1,100 yards as a rookie, and then after that got injured and just kind of slowed down and came to a stop. The Cadillac died. The engine didn't have any tune-ups, no nothing. The wheels just came off and it was over.
He threw a rod. There's no doubt about it. And I believe it was against Carolina on the road where he tore his knee up pretty bad. This is a guy whose cleats are still in the NFL Hall of Fame in Canton, Ohio, because he set the NFL record for most yards rushing in his very first 2 NFL football games. I think he had 100. I remember who he played in the first game. The second game, I think, was Minnesota on the road. He had a late, long 75-yard touchdown run to preserve the win for the Buccaneers. And things were looking really good. Scott Reynolds will tell you he was the 4th best running back taken in that draft, or 3rd best, or something like that. Because you had Ricky Williams. You had who did you mention? The other Auburn kid, Ronnie Brown.
Was Ricky Williams in that draft?
Cedric Benson. Yeah, Cedric Benson. Maybe not Ricky Williams. Yeah, I take that back.
The year before.
But this was a case where 3 running backs were taken in the first 5 picks, and you took the worst one essentially. And guys, again, I like to look back at who they could have had. Right, another quarterback that's in the news today that beat Tom Brady in golf the other day. Aaron Rodgers was in that draft. John Gruden passed up on Aaron Rodgers the draft. Right. The 3rd best running back.
Oh, Josh round. Is getting his first boo session on the pod. I love it. Boo.
Well, let me explain.
Patty, he is not most disappointing.
Part of it is not necessarily disappointing as a player, but disappointing what happened to his career. Obviously, you started off, and if you're a Bucs fan, you're like, oh, yeah, we've got Caddy. Look at this guy run. He's amazing. As Mark just brought up some of his highlights from his rookie year, and then, boom, the injuries start to hit. And then that's disappointing, whether it's his play falling off on itself or injuries limiting him. It's still disappointing. You took him really high in the draft, and you didn't.
At that position, you need an elite player, and you need one early. Yeah,
you need an Adrian Peterson type guy who's going to play that long.
But it is injuries. I mean, Cadillac, to me, I disagree with Scott. I wish you were here. I'd tell him to his face. I think Cadillac was the most talented back in that class, but injuries derailed him. I thought Cedric Benson was the least, and he may have ended up. I don't know. Ronnie Brown had a good career. Ronnie Brown had the best career. I think he ended up being the most durable. I'd have to go back and check it again. And I'm pretty sure he had the best career out of those guys. I forget who else was in that class, but yeah.
Started a Wildcat movie.
But Scott tells the story of John Gruden, who coached the Senior Bowl that year before the draft, falling in love with the name Cadillac Williams,
Yeah.
And you don't draft a guy based on his nickname, but that was part of
Gruden does.
John Gruden loved that fact that, again, if there wasn't an Aaron Rodgers still sitting there, and of course there were 20 other teams that ended up passing before the Packers took him late in the first round. So it wasn't like it was just the Buccaneers who blew that. But man, just disappointing. But again, disappointing because he had injuries. I don't blame players for injuries. I really don't. It's just to me, it's bad luck as much as anything. This person mentions Chris Sims. Are you disappointed that he lost? Are you disappointed that he lost his spleen, JC? I mean, come on. I mean, it's not his fault.
No, boo Chris Sims.
I mean, come on. Do we really think Chris Sims was going to be the future of the Buccaneers franchise?
He wasn't even a high pick, was he? He was like
that's what I'm saying.
2nd or 3rd round guy.
I'll pull him back.
All right.
Any opportunity to take a shot at Chris Sims, I'm totally fine with. But I just
don't
remember
the hate
that one.
for Chris Sims from you, John.
As an analyst, as a human, maybe he's great. I don't know.
Great guy.
Great guy from what I'm told.
Very nice man.
So, okay, there we go. There's 3 for you and 3 for JC. I'll give you I'll give you another name to throw out there because we touched on him at the beginning, and I mentioned he was coming at some point. Vernon Hargraves. I mean, part of it's play on the field. I just think he got worse and worse, really. But another part of it is I don't know how locked in, engaged he was. And then I've watched him with Houston since then, even, and I'm just like, I think he's the worst corner in the league. I watch a lot of football. I think he might be the worst corner in the league. I mean, Tampa's defense totally changed when they got rid of him. I mean, it was that point where the whole unit started moving in the right direction. Getting him off the field was critical. Out of the locker room, critical. I mean, I'm not saying he was like a bad influence guy. You'd know better than I would on that, Mark. I just don't think he was the type of guy that the old regime had that the new regime didn't. I know Light drafted him, but that he was a part of that old Bucs type of mentality, and he just didn't fit at all with. I don't think he fits anywhere in the league, to be honest. But mentality-wise, play caliber-wise, I don't feel like he fits at all with everywhere they've went at the position. They were so much better when they just finally were like, all right, we're done.
And they needed a cornerback that year. And that was, I'd have to go back and look at the other players that were taken after him. I don't think the first round was a great first round that year.
It was a bad
The Buccaneers moved down a little bit to take him. I'll admit, and this is hard for me to admit because I hate the Gators. He was my mock draft pick for the Buccaneers. That morning we did a roundtable on 620, and Vernon Hargraves was my guy. And I was at the NFL owners meeting with Jason Light in Boca Raton earlier that year in the spring. And I jokingly said, please tell me you're not going to draft a Gator. And Jason turned and looked at me real seriously, and he goes, look, I drafted your Seminole last week. Cut me some slack. And I laughed. And then the more I thought about that, I said, they may be serious about this guy. Me as a Seminole guy, I will say this: Vernon Hargraves, the Gators weren't great during Vernon Hargraves' career at Florida, but he was the best player in the secondary for a couple years there. I mean, you just didn't really throw his way, and I thought he was going to end up being a more physical guy as far as tackling. That was one of the things after he was drafted. Jason Light and Mike Smith both said, this guy will come up and hit you and he'll tackle you. But we didn't really see that when he got here to Tampa Bay. And again, I think he was a good effort guy, and he wasn't a bad guy. He wasn't the most, fun, jovial guy to hang out with an open locker room, but he wasn't a bad guy per se. He was no Alvin Harper. But again, you played in Gainesville. What do you expect? You get what you ask for.
Hey, speaking of get what you ask for Green Room, Spotify Green Room, and you're going to get it, especially with JC down here. He has been killing the green rooms for a while, and he's going to be on there a lot. So if you see him starting to fire up a green room, make sure you jump in there and talk to him. But Spotify Green Room is changing the way we talk sports. It's the only place for live audio conversations about the takes, rumors, news, and teams you care about. React to sports news as it happens, gather all your friends and watch parties for the biggest games, rep your favorite teams, and find your community. Better Sports Talk is just a tap away. Download on the Apple App Store and join the conversation with Spotify Green Room. We were on there a little bit yesterday previewing that Bolts game, and they end up coming up victorious. Tampa Bay remains. Congrats to the Tampa Bay Lightning on that Spotify Green Room. I told JC that Andre Palat was going to have the game-winning goal, and he had it on his stick, and he missed it.
Yeah,
I was screaming. That
could have not get it in there. There was so many opportunities right there.
But Ross Colton was the hero.
Johnson was going to score, so
yeah, that's right. And he had some chances too. He played well too. But yeah, it was a nail biter to watch for sure the whole way. But it's hard to doubt Vasilevsky, man. What a player! What an unbelievable player he is.
Best performance I've seen
particularly
since 2011.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Particularly coming off of losses. I mean, Vazzy just doesn't lose after he doesn't lose two in a row. And in
a position,
opportunities. Right. To put a series away, he just came up big. You know what I loved about seeing that last night after the final horn sounded or whatever they do in hockey? He rips his mask off and he's jumping around. You never see any emotion from this guy. They're wearing masks, so it's hard to tell body language and things like that. But, he doesn't get mad. He doesn't slam his stick down a whole lot. You almost think that he's not human back there. And I love to see that emotion on his face after he ripped that mask off and how happy he was. There's no doubt in my mind. And again, I'm no hockey expert, but the Lightning don't have two Stanley Cups in a row without Andre Vasilevsky at all. He's that good. That important. As good as talented as they were offensively, you still got to have a stud behind. Between the pipes.
They just throw their sticks up in the air with like blatant no regard for anyone where they're going to land. It doesn't matter.
Right.
out of the way.
It just cracks me up how, like, I mean, all year I just watch NHL players. I'm like, man, every player talks the same way. They say the same stuff. Every coach is just, it's the opposite of the NBA to me. There's, and in the NFL too, there's like no personality. There's no like anything. But then as soon as the Cups won and it's over, Kucherov shirtless on the press, you know, it's like they just bottle it all season long and then they just go nuts with the Cup, whoever wins it.
Colton out there with a giant champagne bottle feeding the people outside of.
I mean, yeah, it's just like they celebrate like no other. It's just like, but everything's totally buttoned up all year until that point. It cracks me up. Anyway, getting back to these lists here because we got a couple more to finish up. Somebody asked about Michael Clayton, and I don't know if maybe I'm stealing somebody off somebody's list. I don't know, but I am curious to get Mark's thoughts here because the $2 super chat from Lawrence Lowe, we appreciate that. We also appreciate Mr. Bucs Nation throwing a super chat out there. Tall Florida guy throwing a super chat out there. Appreciate those super chats. Those have been picking up again recently. We definitely appreciate those. But Michael Clayton, I don't know. I want your thoughts on it really because I know injuries were kind of part of it too for Clayton. He played for 6 years in Tampa Bay. But after his rookie year,
I don't remember but
nothing.
1 year. That's the crazy thing, John. I followed this team, and I really remember that first, maybe the second year a little bit too. But
what was bizarre, he had an 80 catch, 1,100 yard, 7 touchdown rookie season. Then
what year was his rookie year?
His 2004. Four. And then he was there for 5 more years and never went over. 484 yards was his most ever. He never hit 40 catches again. Like crazy.
Part of his problem was who was throwing him the football. At one point, Bruce Gradkowski was the quarterback of this football team. And, you know, there was Greasy in there. There was Sims in there. I mean, there was no real set established starter for a few of those years that he was here. He had a terrific rookie campaign. I wasn't real big on him coming out. I wasn't overly excited when the Buccaneers drafted him, but I thought, well, he's a big-bodied kind of guy. Wasn't particularly fast. Was more of a possession-type receiver in my mind. And, but, you know, good guy. Does Buccaneer radio stuff on Sunday with Tom Krasnicki. I enjoy listening to his commentary. I think he's completely out of his mind on half the things that he says, but that's what I like about I like radio people that are entertaining. There's no question about it. If Michael Clayton was nothing else on the radio, he's definitely entertaining. But just one of those, you know, he was a mid-round guy in a not a great draft class and just didn't live up to a whole lot of expectations. I wouldn't put him in my top 5. At all. I've got a guy here, John. You ready for my number 2?
Go ahead. Yeah.
Here's another history lesson for you two guys. 1982, the Buccaneers are on the clock. They're coming off of another NFC Central title in 1981. They get ready to make the draft pick. Now let's go back to technology in 1982. There was none of these things here, right? There was no cell phones and computers were in their infancy stage. You actually used an analog telephone to make your choice. So what happens is the Buccaneers are on the clock. They're debating. It's between 2 players, Sean Farrell, a guard, and a defensive end from Bethune-Cookman named Booker Reese. So the Buccaneers actually decided, finally, there's a minute left. Back then they had 15 minutes. I don't remember if it's 10 or 15 now in the first round, but they were down to about a minute left. They get on the phone from Tampa after they make the decision between the 2 guys to draft. But what was said was, we're not going to go with Sean Farrell. We're going to go with Booker Reese, make him the pick. Well, on this speakerphone, again, technology has changed quite a bit. There was a lot of noise up in New York. It was actually at the Sheraton at the time. It wasn't at Radio City Music Hall. A lot of fans like there is now. But anyway, but they were crowded. I mean, back then, the GMs making these calls were amongst the fans, right? So anyway, there was a lot of background noise. The person who was relaying the information to Pete Rozelle, who was the commissioner at the time, misheard Booker Reese and said Sean Farrell. So the Buccaneers actually drafted Sean Farrell, which is fine because he ended up playing 10 years, was a pretty good guard for this football team. The mistake was the Buccaneers completely lost their minds, freaked out, and traded a 1983 pick to go back and get Booker Reese. So they ended up with Booker Reese by accident, used 2 picks, essentially 3, if you count the one that they used in 83, a number 1 draft pick in 1983. In 1983 was a damn good year draft class too. But that's not the worst part. The worst part is Booker Reese in his career in Tampa Bay in 2 seasons had a whopping 2 sacks for this football team. They ended up trading him to the Rams for a 12th round draft pick. That's back when the draft used to go 12 rounds. And he played a couple years in LA, got involved with drugs, and he's still alive, thank goodness, and continue to pray for the guy. but he had alcohol and cocaine problems. He continues to have those things, in and out of prison. Just an awful draft pick for this franchise. And again, 82, 83, they go 2-14, 84, they go 6-10, then they go 2-14, 2 years in a row. So it was kind of the start, to me, the catalyst of the downfall of this football team with the selection of Booker Reese. So again, they mistakenly drafted Sean Farrell, who turned out to be a much better draft pick, but then tried to correct that mistake by trading back up to get this guy and giving up an 83 number 1 draft pick to get a guy that ended up with 2 sacks. That was it. Trying to
picture them like mistakenly drafting somebody today.
It can't happen today. Technology is too good. Too many safeguards. Back then, it was literally a guy on a speakerphone talking to another guy in a crowded room on a speakerphone, and it was just brutal.
That's hilarious. So Garrett brings up an interesting point before we get to JC's number 2. This list better have Bo Jackson. How do you see that one, Mark? Do you think that's fair? Didn't think about it. Oh, wait, we haven't done Mark's number 1 yet.
Hold on.
All right. Pulling back. Here we go. But over to JC. Go ahead, JC.
All right. So I'm going to go with another defensive end that they kind of had. It seemed like they had no choice. I mean, they had a choice. It's the wrong word, but it felt like Gruden thought he had no choice but to take him number 4 overall. They were trying to get him in position to trade up and grab one of the most decorated and just impactful wide receivers of the last generation in Calvin Johnson. Didn't happen. We talked about running backs that they could have taken. If you're going to take a running back with my last guy, Adrian Peterson was a guy they could have had.
Yeah, that was weird. I thought he was like doing like a rap sample of some sort. Yeah. Josh, join back in. I don't know. It was like a sound effect or whatever.
I was like, is that my connection? He was passionate about that choice.
Yeah, no, he
actually wrote a song about it.
Yeah, he was laying down the beats. And
Josh, you back? Can you hear us?
Are you back? 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 That's what you were doing, by the way.
Absolutely. All right. Okay.
I do have a rap song out there if you want to go check it out.
I have no desire to at all.
I was just saying how much better technology is today than it was in '82. Maybe it's not, because J.C. Allen might have drafted Sean Farrell with his last selection right there. We don't know because the connection was so bad.
I can't wait to go back and listen to it. But Gaines Adams was the pick. I don't know if you guys got that far.
Yeah, I figured that out. Yeah, I figured it out. You're right. Yeah,
you could have had Patrick Willis, Adrian Peterson, Darrell Rivas. You went with Gaines Adams. Unfortunately, he passed away. But he gave you 13 sacks, I think, in his 2 years.
And then never. I mean, that was it. So he passed away. He was in between teams, I believe, right? He wasn't on a. I don't think he was on a roster.
This amazing defensive end come in, revitalize your defensive line. Monty Kiffin was stoked about him.
Was he before or after Daquan Bowers, Mark? He was before. He was a little bit before, and
Bowers was a second round pick.
Yeah,
second round pick.
Guys.
But Gaines, like Josh JC said, I mean, you're talking about a top 5 guy, and he just didn't live up to expectations. And again, it's sad that he died. The Buccaneers actually, I believe, traded him to the Chicago Bears. I think he was on the Bears roster
for a second round pick after 3 years.
It's a bonus disappointment. They got Aurelius Ben with that pick. And So it's a double whammy bonus disappointing. You got Gaines Adams, you trade him after a couple of years, and then you get Aurelius Ben, and neither of them did anything.
Oh, yikes. But I will say this, getting 3 years of Gaines Adams, yes, he was disappointment. Then trading him for a second round pick at that point when he had 1 year and probably not a 5th year option on his contract.
That was a steal.
That's great. He was coming off a 1 sack season in his 3rd year after 2 6 sacks.
And then he dies. You get a second round pick for a guy that passed away.
Yeah, I mean,
it's terribly tragic, and I don't even really remember. I mean, he passed away in his sleep, right? It was something
something like that. It was a heart defect
or something like that.
Yeah, terrible. I mean, he was so young and awful. And some people were saying he was on the Bears. I thought he was on. I knew he was on the Bears, and then I thought maybe he wasn't on any team because it would have been his contract year. I thought he was a free agent, but anyway, either way, yeah, that was terrible. We never got to see if anything would amount to him after that, obviously. But Daquan Bowers was another one, and those guys always remind me of the history of Clemson DNs. I mean, just even Cleveland Farrell recently hasn't panned out and at all. Shaq Lawson didn't pan out to live up to expectation. Remember, what's his name? Kevin Dodd was an early second-round pick of the Titans. He completely busted. He's not even in the league. He was completely out of the league in like 2 years. There's other guys too. I'm sure that I'm forgetting about DNs from Clemson, but I don't buy into that as a draft guy. By the way, this is just random that it happened to be that way. Obviously, we're talking about crossing decades here, so there's obviously not much correlation. It's just funny how those guys have just not seemed to work out for whatever reason. All right, so good choice by you. That's number 2. That was your number 2, right, JC? My number 2. I'm just gonna keep bringing up names again. Like I don't know like where to necessarily rank these guys, but like, are we going to talk about Chris? I mean, Chris Baker is the cover of this episode right now. And I know it wasn't necessarily the biggest contract. I'm not saying he's number 2, and I'm not listing him in order necessarily, but I mean, he was a huge disappointment, right? I mean, like just his cavalier attitude, was eating a hot dog on the sidelines, got a can of dip in his hand. Like what was going on with this guy? You were around the locker room, the effect of that. And obviously he didn't last very long. One season he was out of there, Mark, but it just seems like he was a disaster in every sense of the word.
Is douche nozzle an actual word to describe somebody? If it is, that's Chris Baker. Just a a-hole, trying to keep it PG here.
Appreciate that.
Again, he ranks up there with Alvin Harper as far as guys that I just disliked, and Deshaun Jackson's in that list as well, just as far as guys, and Kellen Winslow Jr. or the second or the third or whatever he was. There's just a handful of guys that majority of these guys I've dealt with over the years have been pleasant, some great, some so-so. There haven't been that many turds, but he was one of them, definitely for sure. We knew, I mean, he had a reputation of being that way in Washington, but he had some production. He was coming off a 5-sack season. They thought he could help Gerald McCoy out on the inside and boost that inside interior pass rush.
He was the guy that lit up. Was it Carson Wentz? I think he lit him up on an interception return. Yeah. He like clotheslined him blindside after the play was over, and then Jason Peters went to town, just like hammering Chris Baker, came right at him, both fists flying. It was epic stuff because Peters is like the real BA dude you don't mess with, and Chris Baker was like running back to the sideline after a cheap shot. Oh, I don't think a dude in the league liked. He was very rare. Even guys that I didn't like, there's a handful of guys on the team that like him. He was not liked in that locker room by his own teammates, really, to be honest with you. And then when he left, was even a bigger jerk, because that was when the Bolts and the Capitals kind of had a bit of a rivalry in hockey. And I remember him talking crap on Twitter when the Capitals beat the Bolts in like a playoff series or something like that too. How'd that work out for you, Christopher?
Yeah, not good. Just a real jerk overall. And the thing is, as I was going to say, the Buccaneers knew that, what kind of guy he was. But again, he was coming off a pretty good year. Mm-hmm. But we were told that the Buccaneers, that was the same year they signed Deshaun Jackson, but they went to some of the veteran guys and they said, hey, are you going to be okay if we sign this guy? Because his reputation was known league wide. It wasn't just, with management and things like that. And a handful of the players like, we can handle him. We can tame him. We can keep him, focused, blah, blah, blah. Well, it just never happened. And just a terrible, terrible signing. I think that was 2016 or was it 17 that he was signed? It was the Hard Knocks year, I believe. So, and he was caught humping a palm tree in that Hard Knocks episode. And that episode of him eating a hot dog on the sideline, I think, was also from Hard Knocks. Just a
right away, you knew.
Human being. Yeah.
Right. Somebody wants me to ask you about Broderick Thomas here.
Ooh. I like the Sandman personally. Again, he was on a team that was just terrible. I mean, he was the only good football player on a really, really bad football team. I mean, this was 90, 91, somewhere in there. The thing about it, he was in a draft class where there were a ton of guys that went after him that were just studs and stars. I don't think it was Junior Seau, but there were some guys. I think Seau might have been the Eric Curry year. I can't remember. I'm getting old and forgetful, but there were some great football players in that class. I think Barry Sanders went just ahead of Broderick Thomas, and Deion Sanders went just ahead of Broderick Thomas. Maybe Barry was drafted right after Broderick, but he had a couple decent good years for the Buccaneers. I didn't dislike him as much as some people did, but he was a disappointment again when you're talking about drafting in the top 10 and a guy not living up to expectations. Broderick Thomas was certainly one of those guys that did.
Yeah, for sure.
You guys ready for my number one?
We got to get to number ones, but before we do, I got to talk about our pals over at Loose Cannons. Loose Cannons Travel.com. If you get a chance to check it out, Bucs fans, you got to do it. You can party with other Bucs fans in LA, in New Orleans, and in Atlanta this year at Bucs away games. They've got 4-star VIP hotels, Friday night private parties, drinks, foods, DJ, Saturday night pep rallies, drinks, foods, DJ, all-inclusive tailgates, game day tickets to these games, these away games. I'm telling you, it's an epic package put together by these guys. Let me give you an example of just what some of these packages look like. Let's look at the LA one, because I love LA. Look at this. If you get 4 people to go, you're paying about $1,000 per person. And this is, you get hotel stays, you get Friday night parties, Saturday night pep rallies. We're talking about VIP parties, not like going to the bar with your pals. This is like VIP stuff. There's going to be big name guests there. Jason Light's already said he's dropping in on one of these things if there's wings. You get the catered tailgate. You get tickets to the game. I mean, it's amazing what they have. Just go over to loosecannonstravel.com. Look at these away game packages. See if you can get a few people together and head out to these games. I think what Loose Cannons is doing is really, really cool. Loosecannonstravel.com. I'm going to make sure you check them out and see kind of if one of these packages is right for you that they have offered here, because it's a great opportunity for Bucs fans. And let's just be honest. If you're like, oh, I'll do it another year, you don't know that you're going to get another team like this one. That's not promised to you. This is a team, man, that's worth investing and going and putting some money into one of these things. And they've created, I can't believe you get all that in those packages for like $1,000 per person. If you can get 4 of your boys to go, or 4 or girls, whatever, to go, I mean, that's just a great deal. So definitely check over, go see what those guys are offering, because it's some really good stuff what they've put together for Bucs fans.
Yeah, and if you haven't been to LA for a game, what a great, I mean, that's so far of all my travels, other than London, of course. You can't beat London, but hopefully the Buccaneers don't end up going back to London anytime soon. But LA was just a great trip a couple of years ago, man. I thought it was a great town, had a great time in LA. Can't wait to get back there this year. And you kept mentioning drinks. I will just say I've drank with the Loose Cannon guys before. They're not joking when they say there's going to be alcohol flowing. These guys may be alcoholics. I'm not trying to make any judgments here, but these guys can drink. I can assure you. I've been with them in some social settings where they could definitely drink. So it will be a good time. I guarantee you that. Whether the Bucs win or lose doesn't matter. You're going to have a good time. You may not even remember the game on Sunday if you hang out with these guys Friday and Saturday night, but anyway, yeah, I'm going to check it out. It's
going to be fun stuff. Loosecannonstravel.com. Check it out for sure. All right, number one for you, Mark. Who do you got?
Josh, you have any like countdown music, any like a drum roll sound effect, anything there? Probably not, but we'll just pretend.
Oh, on the clock. And with the first overall pick in the Bucs that suck draft, Mark Cook presents
Tampa Bay Buccaneers select.
Oh, no,
Bo. And here's the thing. Speaking of loose cannons, Sammer did this graphic for us. I believe it was Sammer that did this for me, because I did a story last year. What if the Buccaneers had drafted Bo Jackson, or what if Bo Jackson had played? Because they did draft him. And that's the crazy thing. We talked about Jameis Winston being the number 1 overall draft pick. Well, at least Jameis Winston played in Tampa Bay for 5 seasons. This guy never even played. John, you're going to have to switch it back. I don't know how to take the photo off, but I'm sorry. We're going to be stuck looking at Bo. This one hurts, man.
You just click on it again.
That hurt.
Level of the Buccaneers organization is just at the heart, because you
guys,
he played for him.
He told them, don't draft me. I'm not going to play for you guys. And Hugh Culverhouse said, we'll get him to play. Bo Jackson did not like Hugh Culverhouse, did not get a good vibe for him. He blamed Hugh Culverhouse for him losing his eligibility to play baseball at Auburn, because the Buccaneers flew him to Tampa on their team
after telling him it would be fine, right?
Well, and I did an article a few years ago on one of the 30 for 30s about Bo Jackson. I had an opportunity to interview Bo Jackson himself, and also Hugh Culverhouse Jr. Senior, of course, has passed on. Now, I will say this, believe what you want. Culverhouse Jr. told me the Buccaneers checked with the NCAA, and they were told it would not be a violation. Bo Jackson didn't want to hear any of that. When he got kicked off the baseball team and couldn't play anymore, there was no way, no how, no chance he was ever going to play for the Buccaneers. Yet they still decided to draft him with the number 1 overall pick. Again, Jameis Winston, at least he played 5 seasons. At least he holds the franchise record for most passing yards and touchdown passes and all of those things. Bo Jackson has exactly the same amount of yards rushing for the Buccaneers as you and I and JC have. 0.0. So that's my number one.
Because when you say disappointing, it fits the term. It's not necessarily his fault, but also because he went on to be all these other guys. They were just pretty much that we're talking about. They were just pretty much bad no matter what. You know,
Right.
They just haven't been good. But he was actually good and never did it with the Bucs. Refused to do it with the Bucs. So that
That's
in
what
some
makes
ways
it hurt so much worse, man. And in a time when the Buccaneers were just bad, this was '86. They were coming off a 2-14 season with Lehman Bennett, and they ended up 2-14 that next year. But apparently, Bo came to town, had dinner with some of the offensive linemen, and a few of them apparently, again, this is allegedly not confirmed, said, "You don't want to come here. This is a bad football team, a bad organization." And again, I jokingly said, but it's a true story. Hugh Culverhouse had Coke machines in Old One Buccaneer Place that the players had to pay 50 cents for a soda. I mean, again, you walk in the Buccaneer locker room today, there's just, first of all, they don't have any soda, but there's Gatorades, waters, energy drinks, whatever you want all over the place. Players just grab what they need. Hugh Culverhouse was so cheap, he charged his own players to buy a can of Coke. Bo Jackson took one look at that facility and talked to some players and said, no way, no how, no chance. And the fact that he got ruled ineligible to play baseball was the final straw. But the Buccaneers, and Hugh was just egotistical, thought he could waive $1 million. And they did offer him the largest rookie contract in the history of the NFL. Bo said, no, thank you. Opted to play baseball, ended up being an all-star for Kansas City, and then being a Pro Bowler for the LA Raiders before a hip injury ended his career.
Wow, we're going long on this show, but I got to ask about this because I didn't even think about this. Iron Bear, we're not going to talk about Darrell Rivas. This is crazy because Darrell Rivas obviously was great before Tampa Bay, great after Tampa Bay, only spent 1 year in Tampa Bay. There's an argument he could have been the best. He could be the best corner to ever play football. Yet 1 year in Tampa Bay and wasn't the worst player on the field, right, Mark? But he
was coming off. Remember, he was coming off that knee injury, right, with the Jets. He was coming off the ACL reconstruction, and I don't blame Greg Schiano completely for the play of Darrell Rivas, and I thought it was a good move because you talk about an awful draft class. They ended up drafting Jonathan Banks in the second round, I believe, that year, but it was just not a very good draft class. So getting the best cornerback in football, even coming off an injury for, I think, the number 16 overall pick, I thought was a pretty good deal. The fact that they got nothing in return for him, and he went on to win Super Bowls and played a couple Pro Bowls after that, though, but he just wasn't healthy the first half of that year. And he was asked to do some things that he wasn't good at. Look, you don't try and change, right? You don't try. I don't know what the saying is. You don't the leopard and the spots and the zebra or whatever it is. Look, you don't ask Darrell Rivas to play zone coverage. That's not what he does. He's the greatest cover corner. You could say maybe Dion and a couple other guys, but he's certainly a top 5 guy in the history of the NFL. Now, Greg Schiano will tell you, and he told Scott and I this. He actually took Scott and I back for a little film session one day and showed a game, and he pointed out Darrell Rivas. Opening up the door for a completion to Greg Olsen because, he wouldn't come off of his receiver. He was in zone. He was supposed to hand him off to the to the safety, and instead trailed the cornerback deep, which opened up the flat underneath for Greg Olsen, and it was a long pass completion. And it was very frustrating to Greg Schiano because Darrell wanted to play the way that he wanted to play, but he just wasn't ready the first few weeks of that year to play, in man coverage. But again, they asked him to do some things that they probably shouldn't have, but he also wasn't healthy. It was a 50-50 thing, half on Darrell, half on the coaching staff, in my opinion. But it's disappointing that it wasn't better, but I certainly wouldn't put him on even my top 10 list of disappointing guys.
Right. I understand where you're coming from there for sure. Okay, all right. What do you got, JC?
So we talked about a quarterback earlier that we thought would, controversially might make the list. Is it Jameis Winston, number 1 overall pick? No, it's not. But it is a quarterback, and it is a former number 1 overall pick. We're going to go here with Vinnie Testaverde.
Oh,
you brought in Vinnie Testaverde. Number
going
1
old
overall.
School.
I know a lot of people love Vinnie Testaverde, right? A lot of people still hold him dear in his heart. Let me tell you some of the franchise records he holds still for the Buccaneers. Most times sacked, most interceptions thrown in a season, and most interceptions thrown in his career over 6 seasons. Yeah. He just didn't pan out for the franchise.
Man, if you have the most interceptions in Bucs history and your name's not Jameis, like, wow, you did some work because Jameis was coming for that record, boy. Like, he wanted that thing and you still kept it from him. That's hats off to Vinny.
No, I mean, Vinnie Testaverde did go on to have a long career, played for multiple franchises, did pretty well with the Jets later on in his career. You know, his son, I believe, was down here, 2 years ago?
For about an hour and a half. No, he played one preseason game.
For some reason, people still love Vinnie Testaverde in Tampa Bay. I don't understand it, but you want to talk about disappointing. Anytime you take a quarterback, number one overall, doesn't pan out in the way that he did. I mean, and not to say that there were better quarterback options. I think the best quarterback to come out of that draft was Rich Gannon, and he wasn't anything until later in his career either. So, I guess take it as what you will, but it's still.
I would like to argue with you, JC, but I can't because you make a good point. But let's not forget, in order to draft Vinnie Testaverde, the Buccaneers traded Steve Young to the 49ers to make room. I mean, you talk about double whammies here. I mean, Steve Young was on this roster. They decided that Vinnie Testaverde coming out of college was better. I mean, Jesus, I would love to argue with you, JC, but I can't. You're spot on with this one. It's a good call by you.
That was the same season they traded him?
Do what? Yes.
That was the same. Oh, wow.
Yes.
Yeah. That's a take for me.
Now, make no mistake, Steve Young would not have become the Steve Young that he did in this Buccaneers system under Ray Perkins, right? I mean, he went to Bill Walsh, a guru of football, right? The guy has wrote books about it. I mean, people still do things that Bill Walsh did in the NFL today, 35 years later. So, but he wouldn't have been, but still, just the thought of getting rid of a future Hall of Fame quarterback to bring in a guy who still leads your franchise in interceptions. I loved Vinny personally myself. His very first start late in that, he didn't even start right out of the gate his first year. Steve DeBerg did, but in his first start against the Saints, he threw for over 400 yards, and we thought they still lost. But we thought, man, this guy's going to be really, really good. But I actually was watching an old VHS tape that I had the other day that I found. I found a VCR, plugged it in. It's actually the Bucs at the Rams in 87. And it's Vinny's first. He comes in mop-up duty because the Buccaneers are getting hammered. He was 2 for 2 to start the game. He threw an interception on his third pass, and it wasn't even close. It made Jameis Winston look like Joe Montana. That's how bad this interception was. And it just kept getting worse for Vinny. Great guy. Colorblind too. Again, how does that slip through the cracks when you're evaluating and drafting a guy?
What's up with
the Bucs? Colorblind.
What's up with the Bucs drafting quarterbacks who can't see and got eye problems? Come on, man.
Number 1 overall at that.
They need to add a team optometrist to their staff. Bruce,
hey,
those guys in the league, but
those guys were disappointing. But you know what never disappoints?
Everyone out
guys?
there.
You know what never disappoints?
What?
And you guys know this full well because you experienced the beauty of Manscaped as well. And summer is coming. Summer's here, man. Are you ready to unveil your beach bod? You're in luck. Our friends at Manscaped just launched their 4th generation performance package, which includes the Lawnmower 4.0. You heard that right, the 4.0. Complement your summer bod with a trim from the leaders in male grooming. The sun is shining and calling your name, fellas. Join the 2 million men worldwide who trust Manscaped and get ready for hot guys summer. Oh my. By going to manscaped.com for 20% off plus free shipping with the code PEWTER, PEWTER is the code. It's time to bundle up this performance package 4.0. Let me tell you about this thing. It's got the trimmer, which you need, obviously. You should go without saying. The Weed Whacker ear and nose hair trimmer. This thing is a game changer. It's great. And the Crop Preserver ball deodorant, the Crop Reviver toner.
I'm using the toner right now.
The toner, right? You didn't need to tell us that, but JC,
prove it, JC, prove it.
No, don't prove it.
No, don't prove it.
Boxer briefs. The boxer briefs are incredibly comfortable. They're unbelievable. And a travel bag to hold your goodies. I'm telling you, this thing has everything. The technology on the trimmer is unbelievable. It's waterproof. There's a travel lock for it. There's a light so you can see everything going on down there. No nicks, man. You got to keep everything in tip-top shape. It's great stuff. You got to check it out. The Manscaped, the Performance Package 4.0. It brings that comfort to another level that you've got, and you can get 20% off plus free shipping with the promo code PEWTER, PEWTER. Pewter is the promo code there to make sure you take advantage of that special offer from manscaped.com.
The offer is still on the table. The first $200 super chat we get, I will on camera live carve SR's initials in my chest hair.
In your chest hair, right?
Yes, no, not anywhere else. Maybe my back hair, But yeah, not going any lower than that. But anyway, all we need is a $200 super chat one day, and I will do it live on the air. I promise you. SR will be on my chest hair.
All right, here we go. Number one.
You want
What'd you say, John?
Yes, with the music.
There we go. Go ahead, the music.
And by the way, for everyone that's watching a VHS and a VCR, it's this tape that puts on film that you put into your.
All right, with John's first pick in the Tampa Bay Buccaneers who sucked draft, I've got to go with Anthony Collins. This one shocked me. I don't remember this one really at all, but this was in 2013? 14, I think. So Jason Light's first offseason, right?
Him and Lovey's first year together. Yes.
Listen to this free agent class that they landed. They went all in on the free agent class. Somebody might not be on here that they hadn't signed yet. Found an old article. Michael Johnson, Clinton McDonald, Brandon Myers, Alteron Werner, Josh McCown, and of course, Anthony Collins. What was it? A 5-year, $37 million deal. And Anthony Collins had only started part of one season for the Bengals. He'd been in the league for years. He wasn't a high draft pick. There was no reason in the world to pay this man. He made it 1 year, I think, Mark, didn't, and was not even
because he was a healthy scratch like the last two games of his first year with the Buccaneers. That's how bad he was. Not just on the football field with his performance, but he was just a bad guy in the locker room. Now, I didn't hate the guy. I talked to him plenty of times. Seemed like a nice guy. But you talk about a guy who took the money and ran. He's probably still sitting on a beach somewhere on his own private island on Glazer money, laughing all the way to the bank when he goes and checks his balance because he absolutely robbed this franchise. But Jason Light didn't play around. He realized his mistake. He got rid of him in a hurry. Same thing with who was the defensive end from Cincinnati?
Michael Johnson.
Michael Johnson. Just also bad. Michael at least went back to Cincinnati and continued to play pretty well for the Bengals.
Collins never played again, right?
Never saw a football field again. No, I swear to God, he's in witness protection or he's hiding on an island somewhere laughing. I promise you. Terrible guy.
Oh my gosh, that's crazy. I mean, that's one of the wilder free. I don't have no memory of that. Probably because again he didn't play after that. He played. That was it. I mean, that was crazy. So Tony says I need a drink after listening to this. Said this some terrible. We thought we'd have to right the ship, Bucs fans. You celebrated all this stuff with the Bolts and the Bucs, and now we're just bringing you back down to earth a little bit. Tracy says all three of our faces need manscaped.
Hey,
what? How are you talking about this immaculate
playoff beard?
Like
I am actually going to shave now.
Neck beard alone.
Unbelievable.
I'll throw a little bit more salt in the wound for these guys. I'll bring up Deshaun Goldson, safety from San Francisco. We'll bring up Austin Safarian-Jenkins. He was supposed
to. How about Eric Wright, one of the worst cornerback signings ever? Just terrible in 2012. Ended up hardly playing.
Eric Curry, right? Eric Curry
was one of those guys. Derek Ward, a running back from the Giants, who signed a big deal with the Buccaneers, and this was one of his first things. He got here. They were passing out his equipment. He said to the trainers, well, the Giants gave me 5 pair of socks. I think the Buccaneers only gave him like 3 pair. I mean, that's the prima donna this guy was. He was pissed because he only got 3 pair of socks, not 5. Didn't last very long in Tampa Bay at all.
Well, I mean, the Buccaneers made a great pick of taking Keith McCants at number 4 when they could have number 5.
Yeah, that was the year. Yeah, they took McCants instead of Sayal. And Dexter Jackson, not the Super Bowl MVP, the wide receiver out of Appalachian State or wherever he was, who was just absolutely dreadful. He was an early second-round draft pick. Just terrible. I mean, we could have made a list. We could have done a top 25 of disappointing and still not been able to put everybody in here. There's been some bad guys.
There's a lot of fun. And it's fun to think back and laugh about for sure. Goster Chairless Stank mentions. I just remember Goster because wasn't it Goster that went up against David Irving in that game? And Irving had like 5. I mean, it was like the game where everybody's like, oh, and he like literally ripped Goster's arms off and beat him to death with them. It was incredible to watch.
And Gossard was a nice guy, but he was on his last legs. I mean, this guy's knees were completely shot. He had no chance at all. That was a terrible game because it was Dallas Sunday Night Football. The Buccaneers just needed 2 wins out of their last 3 games, and they would have went to the playoffs. They ended up only getting 1 win out of that. They lost at Dallas, and they lost it at New Orleans on Christmas Eve night the following week, and then they beat the Panthers at home. But that was a bad game for Gossard Chairless, but I don't blame him. He was on his last leg.
Telling you what, lots of memories, lots of fun. Hopefully Bucs fans didn't get sad about this and they had fun going back down memory lane. And hopefully it makes everything they're experiencing now that much sweeter to go back down that lane and remember some of these guys. And
it does, John, especially again for a guy like me who's
Yeah.
seen the awfulness firsthand and has covered this team. This will be my 11th year in the locker room. I mean, some of these guys you guys mentioned, the Hargraves and some of these guys, the Mark Barons, I was here through all this, the Carl Nix, Mercer situations, and Eric Wright and Jonathan Banks and Darrell Rivas. I mean, I saw those firsthand. That was, as great as this job is, right? And guys, make no mistake, we all three have one of the greatest jobs in the world and very envied by many people listening right now. It was difficult at times to get up and go to One Buccaneer Place when you knew this football team had zero chance of being very good. But anyway, again, it still beats digging ditches. I'll say that much.
Those days definitely in the past. The way this is going now. Notice we didn't say anybody from the last 4 or 5 years, maybe something in that time span. They were
other than MJ. I think MJ was the most recent one.
Right. Yeah, that's right. Aguayo. That's right. Yeah, and Aguayo was what, 4 years ago, maybe? I forget now. So, but anyway,
say Anthony's a little bit disappointing. I mean, a 4th round pick still. I wouldn't say super, but did you expect to see a little bit more out of him?
Who was that?
Anthony Nelson.
Based on what we were told by the Buccaneers, who they thought this was the exact quote. I'd never forget the person saying this. We feel he's a more athletic Carl Nassib, and he just hasn't been that way. Carl Nassib, was a 6-sack guy anyway. Anthony Nelson, if he ever gets 6 sacks, I will just shave his initials in my chest. Right. Yeah,
yeah, for sure. Well, it was good stuff. It was fun going back down memory lane. This show went very long. We thought it might, and that's what
Bonus
Thursday does. But hey, you have tomorrow to listen to this pod because we're not going to be on live tomorrow, but we will be back Monday with Stephen Shea. It's going to be an 8:30 podcast at night. On Monday, we will be live. We're talking about his top 100 and a few Bucs that he has embarrassingly left out of his top 100. Get ready to give Stephen a hard time with me, folks, because we're going to give him a hard time. No, he put together a great list. We're going to give him a hard time. We're also going to praise him when it's necessary. If it's necessary, we'll see. Scott and Mark will be on talking about the 15 best Bucs of all time on Tuesday. We got Tristan Wirfs coming on the show on Wednesday. Those Tuesday and Wednesday, those will be 4 p.m. shows as they're slotted right now. And I don't know what we're doing Thursday. We're having a party or something Thursday. We'll do something fun on the podcast as we always do. But again, for another week, we appreciate y'all so much for listening to another edition of the Pewter Report podcast. Out.
Peace.